Welcome back to the flip lesson on the French Revolution. Tonight we're going to be studying the Reign of Terror. So let's jump right on in, class. To pick up where we left off, the Legislative Assembly. The Legislative Assembly was a government which featured a limited monarchy in conjunction with a republic. Voting was limited to the taxpayers. See, the Legislative Assembly, if you guys remember, was established by the Constitution of 1791. And this governing body, I wouldn't go so far as to say it was a full republic, just because it had that limited monarchy aspect in it, but it was a huge step, and it was revolutionary in the sense that it was progressing towards a representative government. In this limited monarchy that was the Legislative Assembly, the king was merely a figurehead. What that means is he was a puppet. He's pretty much equivalent to what the royal family is in England today. They don't really do too much, but they're just there and they look pretty. Now at the time, the royal family sort of got a sense of where things were going to be heading soon. And they knew they didn't play a role. They knew they didn't really have that much of an impact. And they knew they were hated by many of the masses. So they decided to attempt to flee and leave Paris and go to Austria. Because if you guys remember Marie Antoinette, she's actually from Austria, and which would mean they obviously have family there. But however, the royal family was captured and returned to Paris and held in custody. Now the title of the next slide is Legislative Assembly, tensions growing. Now, although this isn't grammatically the best title in the world, it does kind of give you a sense of what's happening. Tensions growing, no matter way to say it. Around Europe, monarchs and leaders feared that the revolution in France could spread to their country. The idea that the masses, the whole population, was rising up and taking over an established divine right monarchy that had been there for years and years and years is quite a scary thought for those that are in power. So, to answer this, coalitions. The word coalitions refers to a group of countries together against France, meaning that they would put together an army, send them into France to basically stop the revolutionary forces and reestablish the old order. The first coalition that would happen during the age of the Legislative Assembly just consisted of Austria and Prussia. And with this increased stress on the revolution and problems coming from all different directions, the revolutionaries were split into two separate political parties, the Girondists and the Jacobins. Now, I'm just going to warn you guys now, this is a very important slide, so you're going to want to take your time and pretty much get all these notes down. This slide examines the Girondists compared to the Jacobins, the two emerging political parties. So first we're going to look at the Girondists. Okay, so first we're going to want to establish a foundation. And in order to do that, the first thing you're going to want to look at is their political stance. The Girondists were conservative. They sat on the right side of the Legislative Assembly. Now what's interesting about this little fact is that obviously today you hear terms of right and left wing politics. That actually kind of spawns from this. The term right wing refers to the Girondists, because they sat on the right wing of the physical building of the Legislative Assembly. It's kind of an interesting little fact. Now, to continue, the Girondists campaigned for the end of the monarchy. They were revolutionaries. However, they lost their enthusiasm for the revolution because it kind of like spiraled out of control, and they kind of, they were more realists. And if you want to point out one influential individual, we're going to want to look at Jean-Paul Marat, and the name doesn't really mean much to you now. He hasn't been a figure that's been covered, but if you look at the opening slide, which I'll bring up for you right now, that's Marat. I'm not going to get into the details of this picture right now. I will come back to it, but he was a Girondist sympathizer, and he was a publicist. He wrote articles for the paper about the revolutionary cause on the side of the Girondists. Now let me come back. Here we are. And the Girondists represented the middle class. The middle class isn't today what you think of the middle class. It's within its own context, obviously. The middle class meant the strong capitalists, those individuals who had made a lot of money on the coming of the Industrial Revolution, at the beginning of factories, the wealthier, non-aristocracy. To progress, we look at the Jacobins. The Jacobins were extremely liberal. They were also known as the Mountain. The reason because they sat on the highest benches in the left of the Legislative Assembly, ergo left wing. I'm not going to have to explain that story again. Same thing, they sat on the left side, however, which happened to be a little bit higher, of the Legislative Assembly. The Jacobins fought for universal manhood suffrage. That's a term that you're familiar with today, because of American history. But basically they wanted everyone to vote. Every single one. The poorest man, the richest man, the king, his subjects. Everyone should be entitled to vote. This is a kind of a very liberal, radical idea for the time. Even in America, the new America, only big landowners had the right to vote. So it's kind of why they refer to it as radical. Today we consider this a great idea and let's do it. But times are different. The leader of the Jacobin Party was named Georges Jacques Danton. Now, as you can tell, I'm horrible with French and French accents, etc. So I'm just going to refer to him as Danton. Danton represented, and the Jacobin Party represented the workers, not the middle class, the lower class, the toilers. And another little interesting phrase about the Jacobins is they were referred to as men of action. They were out in the streets. They were the one that were physically doing everything. Next slide is entitled "The Jacobins Gain Control." Now the title kind of gives it away, but here we go. During the uproar of the invasion, a political unit known as the Commune takes control of Paris. Now the Commune was headed by Danton, again, leader of the Jacobin Party. As the first course of action, the Commune held elections for a new form of government, the Convention. Sorry, I didn't mean to, it's form, not form. Now, just for context, we've been through the Ancien regime, the original government. We went to the National Assembly, the third estate that broke away. We went to the Legislative Assembly, formed by the Constitution of 1791. Now we have the Convention. As the first course of action, oh, I'm sorry, I already read that one. Excuse me. While elections were being held throughout France, thousands of members of the aristocracy were being executed under the suspicion of conspiring with the invaders. Now this kind of gives you a little bit of a window into understanding how crazy things began to get during the French Revolution. To examine the Convention, it's important to note that it lasted from 1792 to 1795. It was the first legitimate French Republic. Again, the Legislative Assembly was not, because it still had the monarch as a figurehead. The Convention lacked stability, however. It faced domestic and international opposition from the Girondists because they were opposed to Jacobins, and internationally it faced a second coalition, which consisted of Austria, England, Holland, Prussia, Sardinia, and Spain. And during the Convention, we see the abolition of the monarchy. No more king. Completely stripped away from French politics. But the abolition of the monarchy is something kind of interesting, so we're going to study that a little bit. And it was a sentiment of the Convention that as long as the royal family lives, the French Republic is threatened. So, something's got to be done about that. The royal family was actually put on trial against the French state, because they were accused of treason. The trial was actually rhetorical in nature, however, so the results were kind of unavoidable. Everybody knew that the king was going to be found guilty. However, his punishment for treason, he was actually executed on January 21st, 1793. I'm sorry, it says 1973. Just switch the 9 and the 7. His wife, Queen Marie Antoinette, was executed on October 6th. Again, switch the 9 and the 7. October 16th, 1793. Daughter Marie Therese was spared, however. She was exiled to Vienna, and I believe that happened in 1795. I'm throwing myself off now. And finally, son Louis Charles was imprisoned and tortured until 1795. Again, this kind of shows just how crazy things were getting. Now, on the right of the slide, you see the picture of the guillotine. The guillotine was actually invented during the French Revolution, and it was how, while these executions were taking place, it was believed to be the most efficient and humane form of execution. Again, another depiction of the guillotine, and this kind of gives you a sense of like how these executions would take place. It was kind of like an event. Everyone got to see it. Kind of sent a message, well, getting everybody pumped up for the revolution. Growing coalitions against the French. Foreign opposition to the French Revolution increased. Frenchmen were beginning to be drafted into the military. This was okay because the Jacobins represented the working class. The working class made up the far majority of France, and they weren't prepared to let the French Revolution die because of foreign influence over French affairs. So that's the second bullet point. I won't have to bring my mouse up. That's what I just went over. But troops were led into battle by General Carnot. Just a figure to recognize. Over the course of the war against the coalition, Rouget de Lisle wrote Marseillaise. Kind of almost a little bit of a rhyme, I think. I don't really know how to speak French. But that song was actually the French national anthem, and it was played for troops as they were being marched into battle. The war lasted about 2 years, and the results were a French victory. France actually acquired additional territory rather than losing land, which is kind of interesting, just because the French had so much going on, and their weak new government wasn't strong. So it's kind of interesting that they not only were able to win a war, but win land in the process. Here's what we've been waiting for: the Reign of Terror. Now, the Reign of Terror, it's quite a lot of information, so you're going to want to take your time with these slides. Get down all these bold and italicized words. Get their meaning down. Understand them. Like I said, very important. Despite the French victory over the invading coalition, France still remained in a state of major unrest, mostly domestic. Because of their popularity with the working class masses, the Jacobin Party grew to dominate French politics. We've already examined that. Danton, leader of the Jacobin Party, rose to the forefront, heading a unit known as the Committee of Public Safety. However, as he was the head of this, he would soon again rise politically, and this position as the head of the Committee of Public Safety, he was actually replaced by Maximilien Robespierre. That's a very, very important name. The role of the committee was to put the Committee of Public Safety again, was to put individuals on trial that were accused of treason against the new French Republic, and those found guilty would actually be executed by the guillotine. Now, like I said, well, I don't know if I've said it, but the guillotine was actually referred to as the national razor. That's the role it played in the French Revolution. It actually got its own name. As we continue, the national razor claimed about 15,000 lives over the course of the Reign of Terror, which was a little bit under a year. The main victims of the Reign of Terror were the aristocracy and the Girondists. Victims of the guillotine were not strictly counter-revolutionaries, but rather nonconformists to Jacobin thought, meaning, well, I'm going to go through these 2 bullet points and then I'm going to explain that more. Although claiming to be consistent with ideals of the Enlightenment, the Reign of Terror and Jacobin procedures seemingly lost rationality. They took the lives of thousands of countless of individuals. This type of behavior took the revolution off course, as it had once wished to spread the ideas of inalienable rights and suffrage. It became tyrannical and took away the most basic right, the right to life. We're going to spend a lot of time on these 2 bullet points and the idea of rights and human rights and when they can be taken away and should they be taken away, but we're going to examine that later. The end of the Reign of Terror. Prominent leader of the Jacobin Party, Danton, tried to call off the executions. He kind of realized that this was spiraling out of control, and his attempt was viewed as an act of treason by the committee. Robespierre, as the head of the committee, actually had Danton executed. The convention also began to regress from the execution as a means to keep the revolution going. Today, Robespierre and the Committee of Public Safety are given the entire blame for the Reign of Terror. And the reign of terror came to an end on July 17th, 1794.